Deputies have arrested a teenager after finding a massive amount of drugs inside his car. The Kern County
What if
Sheriff-
the safest vehicle on the road was the one no one would ever dare to stop? Every day across America, funeral processions move through intersections wrapped in silence. Traffic lights change, engines idle, and strangers pause out of instinctive respect. Drivers lower their radios, some bow their heads. It is one of the last sacred courtesies still honored without debate. No one questions a funeral procession, and for nearly 3 years, according to federal investigators, that unquestioned respect became the perfect shield for a trafficking network that hid in plain sight. The story did not begin with flashing lights or dramatic raids. It began with numbers, quiet, unremarkable numbers sitting inside a financial report. In late 2021, a DEA field office in the Southeast flagged irregular revenue patterns tied to a licensed regional funeral services company. On the surface, the business appeared legitimate and stable. It had years of operation behind it, satisfied families, and standard service records. But the money flowing through its accounts told a different story. Deposits were climbing at a rate inconsistent with the number of recorded services. Transfers moved through subsidiary accounts in carefully structured amounts, just small enough to avoid automatic reporting triggers. Individually, nothing looked criminal. Together, the rhythm felt engineered. Around the same time, a confidential informant in the Midwest mentioned something during a debrief that would quietly change the direction of the investigation. He described a transport method used by certain trafficking groups, a method involving vehicles that nobody pulls over. He didn't have details, he didn't know names, but he knew enough to say the system relied on public hesitation. Why would they? He reportedly shrugged. It's a funeral. When that comment reached analysts already reviewing funeral home financial anomalies, the connection was impossible to ignore. The DEA shared intelligence with the FBI's Organized Crime Division, and a joint review began. There was no rush to make arrests. If a network existed, investigators needed to understand its structure before touching it. Surveillance teams began tracking funeral transport vehicles linked to the flagged business. What they found wasn't explosive at first, just odd. Hearses that should have traveled locally were logging thousands of interstate miles. Vehicles listed as transporting remains to specific cemeteries returned along routes that did not align with those destinations. GPS data showed detours through known trafficking corridors. None of it proved criminal activity, but the patterns were forming.
Financial analysts widened the scope. Shell companies registered across multiple states, Georgia, Tennessee, Ohio, Texas, Nevada, Illinois, were receiving consistent but modest payments from funeral-related entities. The transfers were staggered, structured, and deliberately inconspicuous. Maintenance garages in different states serviced identical vehicle models showing similar structural alterations. Drivers rotated assignments frequently, minimizing long-term accountability. As more data layered together, the picture became clearer. This was not accidental overlap, it was coordinated movement. Court-authorized wiretaps added another dimension. Conversations never explicitly mentioned narcotics. Instead, coded language described added weight, cooling adjustments, timing the line, and aligning the corridor. One intercepted message stood out: "Make sure it's part of the real line." Investigators later explained that phrase referred to embedding transport vehicles within legitimate funeral processions to reduce scrutiny. It was a chilling realization. The system wasn't improvisation, it was choreography. Undercover operatives were inserted into peripheral services such as vehicle maintenance and logistics contracting. Over months of careful positioning, they confirmed what financial data had suggested. Vehicles had been professionally modified with hidden compartments built beneath reinforced floor panels, inside structural beams, and behind refrigeration units. The compartments were precise and balanced, designed to avoid altering vehicle suspension or handling. Packages, primarily fentanyl, methamphetamine, and counterfeit prescription pills, were vacuum sealed and insulated before being secured inside these cavities. In some cases, legitimate funeral supplies were layered above concealed packages to create credible context during any potential inspection. The most unsettling detail was that many processions were entirely real. Grieving families unknowingly traveled alongside vehicles carrying millions of dollars in narcotics. The traffickers had recognized a simple truth: law enforcement officers hesitate to disrupt funeral convoys. Civilians yield instinctively. Police escorts often assist with traffic control. Stopping a vehicle mid-procession is complicated, visible, and socially sensitive. The operation relied less on force and more on psychology. It weaponized respect. As investigators mapped more connections, they realized the system extended beyond a single funeral provider. Multiple trafficking organizations had paid into the transport method as a premium service within their supply chains. Encrypted messaging applications coordinated route adjustments, and instructions were compartmentalized, so no single driver understood the full operation. Financial forensic teams eventually estimated the street-level value of drugs moved through the pipeline at more than $200 million. For nearly 3 years, the network had functioned beneath a shield of cultural immunity. The procession moved slowly through city streets, flags mounted on hoods catching the wind. Drivers waited quietly at intersections. No one asked questions. That silence, investigators would later say, was not accidental. It was the foundation of the entire operation. Before sunrise on a Tuesday morning, federal teams assembled across 7 states. There would be no staggered arrests, no gradual pressure. If one location tipped off another, encrypted devices would be destroyed and vehicles would vanish. The operation had to move the way the network itself had moved, coordinated and precise. Within a 40-minute window, more than 200 law enforcement personnel executed synchronized warrants targeting funeral properties, storage facilities, maintenance garages, distribution hubs, and private residences. There were no dramatic sirens, just rapid, methodical entry. At one location, agents secured a row of modified hearses before ignition keys could turn. Floor panels were removed on site, revealing vacuum-sealed packages hidden beneath reinforced compartments. In another state, a warehouse adjacent to a licensed funeral facility contained commercial-grade drug packaging equipment and over a dozen transport vehicles in various stages of modification. Body camera footage later showed agents lifting structural panels to expose concealed cavities built with professional precision. By mid-morning, more than 60 individuals were in custody. Charges ranged from conspiracy and trafficking to money laundering and obstruction. Some defendants held active professional licenses within the funeral services industry. Others were career traffickers who had purchased access to the method. Investigators confirmed the network had operated in some capacity for nearly 3 years before federal scrutiny intensified. The estimated value of transported narcotics exceeded $200 million.
Officials later described the exploitation of funeral processions as a calculated psychological maneuver. The network had not relied on speed or secrecy alone. It had relied on cultural boundaries, the shared understanding that certain rituals are not to be disturbed. That boundary created hesitation. Hesitation created opportunity. Opportunity became infrastructure. Communities reacted with shock and disbelief. Families who had used implicated services struggled with the proximity of criminal activity to their moments of grief. Authorities emphasized that many legitimate clients had no knowledge whatsoever, and that authentic processions often provided visual credibility to the scheme. Regulatory agencies began reviewing cross-state transport protocols, but discussions were careful. No one wanted to erode the dignity of funerals. That delicate balance underscored how deeply the network had embedded itself in public trust. Behind the scenes, analysts examined how the system had sustained itself. Regional coordinators managed routes. Drivers received fragmented instructions to limit exposure. Payments were structured to avoid automatic compliance alerts. Communications were encrypted and self-erasing. It operated less like a street-level operation and more like a logistics corporation. The criminals had studied law enforcement patterns, public behavior, and social ritual, and then built a transport model around them. When prosecutors announced the charges, they referred to the takedown as surgical. The network had not imploded under pressure. It had been mapped and removed piece by piece. Investigators reflected on the image that had shielded the operation for years: a hearse gliding down a quiet street, flags rippling gently, strangers pausing out of respect. That image remains unchanged in communities across the country. Funeral processions still move. Traffic still stops. Heads still bow. But inside federal offices, the symbolism carries new weight. This case was not only about narcotics, it was about vulnerability, about how criminal systems adapt to the spaces society agrees not to question. They hide inside rituals. They move within trust. They operate during moments when humanity lowers its guard. For nearly 3 years, the silence surrounding funeral processions protected something no one could see. Until one morning before sunrise, that silence was broken.